I'm 32F, and I think I'm starting to lose my grip on reality. Or maybe my husband, 34mm, is. We've been married for 7 years, and Tom has always been a tinkerer, the kind of guy who fixes the toaster instead of buying a new one. When we bought our house, the rickety old shed in the backyard was his man cave project. I was totally fine with that. I figured he'd insulate it, put in a workbench, and build birdhouses or something. But for the last 6 months, it's become something else. It started when he replaced the flimsy little door lock with a heavy-duty steel deadbolt and a keypad, and he made a point of telling me that he was the only one who needed the code. He said it was to protect his expensive equipment, but I'm the one who handles the finances, and I haven't seen any big purchases from a hardware store. Things got stranger. He used to just spend weekends out there, but now it's every single night. He'll come in from his office job, eat dinner with me while barely speaking, and then he's out the door to the shed by 7 p.m. He doesn't come back inside until well after I've gone to bed. Sometimes I hear the back door creak open at 3 a.m. When he slides into bed, he smells awful. It's not sweat, and it's not another person's perfume. It's a sharp metallic smell, like old pennies and bleach, with a faint sickly sweet undertone, almost like burning sugar. I've asked him what he's doing, and he just gets this tight, almost pained look and says it's a very complicated project. He told me I had to trust him and that he couldn't talk about it because it would ruin the surprise. I tried to trust him. I really did. I thought maybe he was brewing his own weird beer or restoring some antique with harsh chemicals. But last night, I couldn't sleep. I was getting a glass of water just before midnight when I looked out the kitchen window. The shed was dark, as it always is. He must have blacked out the windows from the inside. But as I watched, a light flickered on. It wasn't a normal, warm workshop light. It was a dull, pulsating purple glow that lit up the grimy window frame from within, and it was pulsing in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. I just stood there, my hand frozen, watching that awful light pulse in the dark, and I realized my hands were shaking. I practically ran back to the bedroom, my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to be sick. I didn't sleep at all, just laid there staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of the back door. When Tom finally came in around 3:30 a.m., I pretended to be asleep. I could feel the cold radiating off him as he got into bed, and that chemical smell, now mixed with the damp night air, was overpowering. I wanted to ask him what the light was, why he was lying to me, but I was genuinely, deeply afraid. The man I'd been married to for 7 years suddenly felt like a complete stranger, one who kept terrifying secrets locked in a shed. The next morning, I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway for work. I gave it 10 minutes, just to be sure he was really gone. I'd never felt so sneaky in my own home, but I couldn't ignore this anymore. I grabbed the spare house key, even though I knew it wouldn't work on the keypad, and went out back. The shed looked completely normal in the bright morning light. It was just a stupid, peeling paint wooden box. But as I got closer, the smell hit me. It was faint, but it was definitely the same odor from last night, baked into the air around the door. I put my ear against the wood and heard nothing, just dead silence. I tried the knob, jiggled the deadbolt, and even pounded on the door, feeling ridiculous. Nothing. I went around to the side window, the one I'd seen the purple light from. From the outside, it just looked dark. I cupped my hands around my face and pressed my nose to the glass, trying to see inside. That's when I saw that it wasn't just dark. He had taped thick, heavy-duty aluminum foil over the entire inside of the window, shiny side in. Every gap was sealed with black electrical tape. It wasn't just for privacy. It looked like he was trying to reflect something inward. I was starting to panic, thinking about what kind of hobby requires a keypad lock, blacked-out windows, and working all night. I was circling the shed for the third time, pulling at the siding, when I noticed something new. Tucked behind a low-growing azalea bush was a small circular vent fan, the kind you'd use for a bathroom, cut directly into the shed's foundation. It wasn't there last summer. I knelt down, and the smell of bleach and burnt sugar was incredibly strong, wafting out of the vent. As I was leaning in, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I almost screamed. I pulled it out and saw a text from Tom. It said, "Left my work phone at home. I'll be back to get it in 2 minutes. Are you near the door?" My blood turned to ice. I didn't text him back. I just scrambled up and ran as fast as I could back to the house, getting to the kitchen door just as I heard his tires hit the gravel driveway. I slammed the door shut, fumbled with the lock, and leaned against it, breathing hard. I was trying to figure out if I could look normal when I was absolutely radiating panic. He came in through the front door, and I heard his footsteps stop. I walked into the living room, trying to force my hands to stop shaking. He was just standing there, holding his work phone, looking at me. His face was completely blank. He didn't yell. He didn't ask what I was doing in the yard. He just tilted his head and asked if I was feeling okay, that I looked really pale. The total lack of normal emotion was 1,000 times scarier than if he'd been angry. I stammered something about feeling dizzy. Maybe I got up too fast. He just watched me for a few long seconds, seconds that felt like hours, before nodding slowly. He told me to take it easy, and that he had to get back to the office. He left, and I immediately locked the door behind him. The entire conversation lasted less than a minute, but I knew. He saw me. He knew I was at the shed. His calm, cold reaction was the warning. I was paralyzed for a while, but the fear started to curdle into a different kind of anger. This is my house, too. I'm not going to be terrorized by a purple light and a chemical smell. I waited until I was sure he was gone for the day, and then I went back out. But I didn't go to the shed. I went to the recycling bin. I was shaking as I lifted the lid, not knowing what I was looking for. At first, it was just our normal stuff. Milk jugs, Amazon boxes. But at the very bottom, shoved underneath a pile of cardboard, was a garbage bag. He'd tried to hide it. I ripped it open, and the smell of solvent and bleach almost knocked me over. Inside were dozens of empty gallon-sized plastic jugs of distilled water, all crushed flat. Tucked among them were several empty yellow bottles of a heavy-duty industrial cleaning solvent, the kind with warning labels all over it. And underneath all of that, I found 3 small scorched metal dishes, like the kind you'd put under a houseplant, except they were blackened and warped from intense heat. Distilled water, toxic solvents, and burnt metal. None of this was for a surprise. I ran inside and started Googling the name of the solvent. The results that came up were for things I couldn't even pronounce, chemicals used in high-tech manufacturing or laboratories. I was starting to feel like I was in real serious danger. I spent the next few hours in a state of paralyzing terror. I kept thinking about that text. "Are you near the door?" He wasn't just coming back for his phone. He was checking on me. He knew I was getting suspicious. Maybe he'd seen me at the window the night before. I felt like a bug in a jar he was watching. When he got home that evening, the air in the house was so thick I could barely breathe. He tried to act normal, asking me what I wanted for dinner, but it was a performance. His eyes were cold and watchful. Every time I moved, I could feel him tracking me. I just wanted to get in my car and drive away. But where would I go? And what would I tell people? That my husband smells like bleach and has a purple light? I felt completely, utterly trapped. After dinner, he got up from the table. He didn't even say he was going out back. He just walked to the back door, slid it open, and I heard the faint beep boop beep click of the keypad lock. He was gone. The silence he left behind was almost worse than the tension when he was here. I waited listening until I was sure he was settled in whatever mad science lab he'd built. I knew I couldn't go near the shed again. He was expecting it. So I went to his home office instead. He always keeps it meticulously clean, but I've never had a reason to go through his things. Until now. I felt disgusting, like I was the one doing something wrong. But I had to know. I started with his desk drawers. The first few were normal. Pens, tax documents, old chargers. I was about to give up when I pulled open the deep bottom file drawer. It was mostly hanging files for our mortgage and car insurance, but way in the back, behind everything, was a plain manila folder with no label. I pulled it out, and my hands started shaking again. It wasn't full of receipts. It was full of printed out schematics, complex diagrams of wiring and circuits that made no sense to me. They looked like blueprints for some kind of machine. Underneath the diagrams were printed articles from weird, obscure websites I'd never heard of, with titles about high-voltage experiments and electromagnetic fields. I was trying to make sense of a diagram that showed a metal dish, just like the scorched ones I found in the recycling, when I found a spiral-bound notebook. It was full of Tom's neat, precise handwriting. It was a log, page after page of dates, times, and measurements. Test 47, containment failure. Test 51, arc stable for 3.2 seconds. It was terrifying. But on the very last written page, dated 2 days ago, he had written something that made me drop the book. It said, subject integration unstable. The small fauna subjects didn't survive the exposure. Need a larger, more resilient test sample. Need to move to phase 2 soon. Small fauna subjects. My brain just snagged on that phrase. Fauna. Animals. I almost threw up right there in his office. I've been hearing him out there, hammering and working, and I pictured him building a boat or a piece of furniture. But he'd been in there testing something on animals. All those nights, that awful chemical smell. Was that him? Was he disposing of them? The thought was so vile I couldn't process it. And then the second part hit me, like a physical blow. Need a larger, more resilient test sample. I put the notebook back in the folder, my hands so clammy I smudged the cover. I felt like I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. What was phase 2? What, or who, was the larger sample? I shoved the folder back into the drawer, trying to put it exactly as I'd found it, and ran to the bathroom, where I was violently sick. I was sobbing, trying to muffle the sound so he wouldn't hear me through the walls. I was locked in a house with a man who was running horrifying experiments on animals, and he was ready to move on. I kept seeing that purple light in my head, pulsing. I finally understood the feeling I got from him at dinner. It wasn't just anger. It was an assessment. He was looking at me, but he wasn't seeing me, his wife. He was seeing his next subject. I splashed cold water on my face, my reflection a terrified stranger. I had to get out, but I had no proof. If I ran to the police or my family, what would I say? I'd sound insane. I'd be the hysterical wife, and he'd be the calm, rational Tom, the guy who fixes toasters. He would deny everything, show them his empty shed, and I'd be the one who got put away. I had to be smart. I had to be as cold and calculating as he was. I needed to know exactly what was in that shed. I couldn't break in. He'd know immediately. But I had to see inside. I spent the rest of the night in our guest room, locking the door and shoving a chair under the knob. I told him through the door that I was feeling sick, which was the truest thing I'd ever said. I didn't sleep. I just watched the sun come up. As soon as I knew he was gone for work, I had a plan. I drove to a big box electronics store, my entire body humming with adrenaline. I felt like everyone was watching me. I went straight to the security aisle and bought the smallest, most expensive Wi-Fi-enabled nanny cam they had. It was a tiny black cube I could monitor from my phone. I also bought a heavy-duty, weatherproof extension cord. I knew exactly where I was going to put it. That little vent fan he'd installed, it was the only way in. I got home from the store, and my hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the camera just trying to get it out of the plastic packaging. I felt like a criminal in my own backyard. I grabbed the extension cord and plugged it into the outdoor outlet by our back patio, the one we use for Christmas lights. I had to unspool the entire 100-foot cord, snaking it behind the landscaping, pushing it deep into the mulch and under the azalea bush so it wouldn't be visible from the house. I was drenched in sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced that at any second he would pull into the driveway and find me. I finally got to the vent. It was just a cheap plastic grate, and I managed to pry it off with a screwdriver from my kitchen. My hands were so unsteady, I almost dropped the tiny camera into the crawl space. I reached into the dark, dusty hole and positioned the camera, angling it up through the slats of the fan. I couldn't get it inside the shed, but it was aimed right at the opening. It wasn't a perfect view, but it was a view. I plugged the camera into the extension cord, shoved all the excess wiring deep under the bush, and then snapped the grate back on. It looked almost normal. I threw a handful of dirt on the bright orange plug of the extension cord to hide it, and then I ran back inside. My fingers were fumbling as I downloaded the app and connected the camera to our Wi-Fi. It took 2 tries, and I almost cried with frustration, thinking it wouldn't work. Then finally, an image popped up on my phone screen. It was dark, just a black rectangle. I toggled the night vision setting, and the screen flickered to a grainy green and black image. I could see something. It was the inside of the shed, but not the way I pictured it. I wasn't looking at a workbench. I was looking at a massive metal thing in the center of the room, covered in a heavy canvas tarp. It was huge, taking up almost the entire space. The walls, what I could see of them, were covered in that same reflective aluminum foil I'd seen on the window. I heard his car door slam. He was home. I threw my phone onto the couch, my heart leaping into my throat, and tried to look like I was just reading a magazine. He walked in, gave me the same cold, appraising look, and I offered him a weak, shaky smile. I made us dinner. I washed the dishes. I acted. Every second was a new kind of agony. He ate in silence, and then, just like last night, he got up, went to the back door, and left. I waited until I heard the click of the deadbolt. I grabbed my phone, my hands slippery with sweat, locked myself in the bathroom, and opened the app. The grainy night vision image of the dark shed filled my screen, and I just waited. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, my back pressed against the locked door, watching the grainy, silent movie of my husband's secret life. For at least an hour, nothing happened. It was just the still green-black image of the tarp-covered machine. I was starting to think he'd just gone in there to sleep, or maybe he was on the other side of the room, out of the camera's view. My eyes were burning from staring at the tiny screen. And then, a shadow moved. I gasped, choking on the sound. Tom walked into the frame, his back to my camera. He was wearing heavy-duty work gloves and some kind of thick rubber apron over his clothes. He stood in front of the object, and with one smooth motion, he pulled the heavy canvas tarp off. I couldn't have screamed if I'd wanted to. It wasn't a workbench. It wasn't a car. It was a machine. A terrifying, complex, homemade machine that took up the entire center of the shed. It was a metal framework, like a cage, holding a large cylindrical glass chamber in the center. It looked like a nightmarish, high-tech coffin set on its end. Thick black cables snaked from the top and bottom, connecting it to a massive, humming metal box in the corner that I guessed was a generator. He walked over to the generator and flipped a series of switches. He didn't turn on a work light. Instead, the inside of the glass chamber itself began to glow. It started as a faint flicker, and then it swelled into that sickening, deep purple light, pulsing with a slow electric rhythm. My phone screen was small. The image was bad, but I saw everything. He went to the side of the shed, just out of frame, and came back holding a small wire cage, the kind you buy at a pet store. There was something dark huddled inside. He unlatched a small, thick-looking hatch on the side of the glass chamber, and with his gloved hands, he reached into the cage, pulled the small animal out, and placed it inside the chamber, onto one of the scorched metal dishes I'd found. He sealed the hatch, and then he went to a control panel I hadn't seen, just a box of dials and levers attached to the side. He put his hand on a large red lever. He just stood there for a moment, watching the animal inside the purple glow, and then he pulled the lever down. The camera feed didn't have sound, but I saw it. The purple light inside the chamber exploded into a blinding, violent flash of white-violet light, a silent electric arc that filled the entire chamber. The camera image on my phone fizzed. The screen went to snow, just loud, hissing static. The electrical surge from whatever he'd just done must have fried the camera instantly. I was staring at a dead screen. I had no proof. I had no idea what happened after that flash. I was alone, locked in the bathroom, and my only tiny window into his world was gone. I sat on the bathroom floor, the phone clutched in my hand, staring at the screen of hissing static. The silence from the rest of the house was deafening. He had a machine. He was killing animals. And my camera, my only proof, was a melted piece of plastic somewhere under an azalea bush. I was going to die. He was going to use that thing on me. I was the larger, more resilient test sample. I stayed locked in that bathroom until I heard the shed's keypad beep for the second time. It was 3:17 a.m., his usual time. My entire body went rigid. I heard the back door slide open and closed. I heard him rinse his hands in the kitchen sink. I heard his footsteps, slow and measured, coming down the hall. I held my breath, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom door. He knew I was in there. I could hear the faint, sharp smell of ozone and burnt sugar through the crack under the door. He tried the knob. It was locked. He didn't knock. He didn't call my name. He just stood there. I could hear him breathing, a slow, deep inhale and exhale, just on the other side of the wood. It felt like he was listening to my heartbeat. After what felt like a lifetime, the footsteps turned and walked away. I heard our bedroom door close. I didn't move until the sun was up. As soon as I saw bright light peeking through the blinds, I unlocked the door. I didn't look toward the bedroom. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter, my car keys from the hook, and I ran. I didn't pack a single thing. I got in my car, backed out of the driveway, and I just drove. I'm at a motel 2 towns over. I tried to call my sister, but the second I tried to explain, she told me I sounded like I was having a breakdown and that I needed to go home to Tom. I even tried the non-emergency police line, and the dispatcher told me she could send someone for a wellness check on my husband. I hung up. I have no proof. I'm alone, and I know he's going to find me. Update 1. It's been 3 days. Thank you to everyone who messaged me. I followed the advice of many of you and spoke to a lawyer who specializes in domestic violence. She was the first person who actually listened to me and didn't make me feel insane. She told me to stay hidden, document everything, and not to respond to any of his messages. And there have been a lot of messages. Dozens of texts and voicemails, all of them sounding like the old Tom. Worried, confused, begging me to just tell him I'm safe. But last night, he found me. He didn't come to the hotel. He sent an email. It wasn't to my main account. It was to an ancient Hotmail address I haven't used since college, an account he shouldn't even know exists. The subject line was just 2 words. Phase 2. My blood went cold. There was no text in the email, just a single video file attached. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click it. I'm so sorry I watched it. The video was from a new camera, placed inside the shed, looking directly at that glass chamber. Tom walked into the frame. He was wearing a thick motorcycle helmet, and he was holding my old digital camera from college, the one I thought was in the attic. He unsealed the hatch on the glass chamber, and he climbed inside. He sat down on the small platform, sealed the hatch from within, and looked directly at the new camera. He held up my old camera, then he reached out and pulled the big red lever himself. The screen went white, that same blinding, violent flash. But this time, the camera didn't die. The light faded, and the chamber was empty. He was gone. The video just kept recording the empty, pulsing purple chamber for 10 solid minutes before it ended. Final update. I'm posting this from my sister's house. After I got the email, I called 911. I sent the video file to the detective my lawyer had contacted. They finally took me seriously. They went to the house with a full tactical team and a warrant. They had to use a battering ram to get into the shed. The keypad lock was apparently fused. The machine was there, just like I said, but it was destroyed. The detective said the glass chamber had exploded from the inside, shattering into thousands of pieces. The generator was fried, smoking, and the walls of the shed were scorched black. There was no sign of Tom. He was gone. They're calling it a missing person case, but the officers who were there looked sick. They found one thing in the middle of all the shattered glass, right where the metal dish would have been. It was my old digital camera, partially melted and fused to the floor. The police in the tech lab managed to get the memory card out. The video file of him disappearing was there, but it wasn't the last file. There was one more, a single corrupted photo. It was time-stamped just 3 seconds after the video cut off. It's almost entirely static, just a mess of purple and black lines. But if you look closely, you can see it. It's a picture of something. It's not our shed. It's somewhere else. It's dark, but the walls themselves are glowing with that same awful purple light. And in the foreground, you can see the scorched metal dish from the chamber, sitting on what looks like a floor of black rock. Tom is nowhere to be seen. He didn't just disappear. He went somewhere. And I'm starting to think he finally finished his surprise, and he's not coming back.